Hello students, welcome back to Nucleus Neet Foundation Academy, and today we are going to start part 3 video of the chapter The Living World. So in this class today we are going to discuss the fundamental characters of living organisms one by one in detail. Okay, so in the last class we just generalized the characters of living organisms. Now in today's class each character we are going to discuss in detail. Okay. So my dear students, let us start with the most important character in living organisms, that is the growth. What is growth? The permanent irreversible increase in size and mass of the organism is called as growth. I am going to write the definition here. The permanent irreversible increase in size, mass of organism is called as growth. So what is the growth, students? The permanent irreversible increase in size, mass of the organism. So during this process called growth, the size of the organism is going to increase day by day, isn't it? And the mass of the organism, the mass of the body, the mass of the organism is also going to increase day by day, isn't it? And once the organism has attained a particular size and mass, then once again the organism is not able to lose that size and mass. That's why it is a permanent and a irreversible process. Now let us see how this growth occurs in different types of living organisms. First we will start with plants. Students, imagine that in your garden you have planted a small plant, a small mango plant, isn't it? A small mango plant, and you are watering this plant day by day. So after few years, this mango plant will grow into a large tree, isn't it? This mango plant, it will grow into a large tree. Okay, so this mango tree, it has a lifespan of several years. It can grow, it can survive for several years. Okay, so until the end of the lifespan, the mango tree, it keeps on growing. It will be producing on new branches, new flowers and new fruits and new leaves. So the growth process keeps on growing. So it is continuously growing. The growth in this plant will never stop, isn't it? So in all the plants you can see similar pattern of growth. That is, growth will be continuous till the end of the lifespan. So the growth is continuous in plants. The growth occurs till the end of the lifespan in the plants, isn't it? Next, animals. Then how the animals grow? Imagine that in your house there is a small rabbit, baby rabbit. You have bought a baby rabbit from a pet shop. This is a baby rabbit. Okay. Now after some months, the rabbit grows to its maximum size. Okay. It will grow to its maximum size, and afterwards the rabbit is not growing. It stopped growing. That means growth in animals occur only up to certain age, isn't it? After that age the animals stop growing. So from this what we can say, the growth is not continuous. The growth is not continuous throughout their lifespan. It will occur only up to certain age. So what about we human beings? We human beings will grow up to age of 18 years, isn't it? Once you get 18 years age, then you will stop growing, isn't it? So same thing is applicable for all the animals, but this is not applicable for the plants. The plants keep on growing up to their end of their lifespan. Understood, students? Yeah. Now let us see how growth occurs in unicellular organisms. In unicellular organisms. So what are unicellular organisms, students? Unicellular organisms are those organisms whose body is made up of a single cell, only one cell. Okay, such organisms are called as unicellular organisms. Come on, tell me some examples of unicellular organisms. Students, bacteria. Your bacteria is a unicellular organism. Look here, this is the bacteria. It is having some tail-like structures which are called as a flagella. By using these structures, the bacteria can move. Okay, its body is completely made up of a single cell, only one cell. Another example of unicellular organism is amoeba. So what is that? Amoeba. Amoeba, it is having irregular shaped body and there is a proper nucleus inside this organism, but bacteria does not have nucleus. Okay, so this is amoeba. So this is also a unicellular organism. So how growth will take place in this unicellular organisms? Growth occurs by cell division. So what process growth occurs? Growth occurs by cell division. Note down this point, students, very important. Note down this point, very important. Growth occurs by cell division in unicellular organisms. Okay, so what is cell division? Look here, students, a bacteria is there. This bacteria will divide. It will divide and it form two bacterial cells. A single bacterial cell is going to split into two pieces and each piece will form a separate bacterial cell. So this is what we call it as cell division. And similarly, amoeba, our amoeba is also going to divide by cell division and it form two daughter amoeba cells. Okay, so here the cell division process which we are calling here growth occurs by cell division. Actually this process we are calling it as binary fission. The cell division is nothing but binary fission, the process by which a bacterial cell or amoeba cell is going to divide and form new cells. We can call it as a binary fission. It is also a method of reproduction, students. Okay, so here one important thing you have to notice that the unicellular organisms, they are able to grow by process called as cell division and they are also able to reproduce by same process called as cell division. Okay, when we are talking about reproduction in unicellular organisms, we are using this term called as binary fission. So what is a binary fission? It is nothing but cell division. The cell is going to divide into two pieces. Okay, so it is also a method of asexual reproduction. What is binary fission? It is a method of asexual reproduction. It is one of the methods of asexual reproduction. Okay, what process is involved in this binary fission? Cell division. Simple. Understood, students? Understood, everyone? Yes. Note down this. Now students, we will discuss the two important characters of growth. These are from the lines of NCERT book. Increase in mass, increase in mass, increase in number, increase in number of individuals are two characters of growth. So during growth, these two processes are involved, students. That is, increase in the mass of the organism is gradually increasing. Okay, and also the number of individuals are also increasing in case of unicellular organisms. That's why in NCERT book they are telling that increase in mass and increase in the number of individuals are the two main important characters of the growth. So note down this point also, very important, students. Now we will discuss how actually growth in living organisms will occur. Growth occurs due to number one, cell division, which we have already discussed. Growth occurs due to cell division. So in multicellular organisms, what happens? The cells will divide and produce new cells. So because of increase in number of cells, the total size of the organism will increase. So in unicellular organisms, the growth is taking place in terms of number of individual cells, and this is also requiring the process called as cell division. Okay, so what is a cell division? Look here students, this is one cell. The cell is splitting into two cells. The cell is splitting into two cells. So thereby from one cell two cells are formed. This process we are calling it as cell division. Because of increase in number of cells, the growth is taking place in the living organisms. Next, the second reason for growth is because of cell enlargement. Cell enlargement. So what is cell enlargement? The size of the cell will increase. So this is newly formed cell. After some time the size of the cell will increase like this. Okay. So because of increase in size, because of increase in the size of the cell, also the growth takes place in the living organisms. And the third reason why the growth happens in the living organisms, accumulation of non-living materials. So in the living organisms, accumulation of certain non-living materials will take place. Because of also growth will take place. Because of which growth will take place. So what is a non-living material? Non-living material, for example, in the bones of human beings, there is a non-living material called as calcium carbonate. So because of accumulation of this calcium carbonate, the mass is going to increase. Yes or no? So is calcium carbonate living material? No, it is a non-living material, isn't it? Similarly, in the oceans you can find some snails. The shell of this snail is made up of again calcium carbonate. Because of deposition of new calcium carbonate material, what happens? The size of that shell will increase. The mass of the shell also will increase. Okay. So such type of non-living material accumulation will also cause growth in living organisms. Understood students? In case of plants, cellulose is a cell wall material which is a non-living material. Because of this cellulose cell wall material, what happens? The mass of the plant will increase, isn't it? So this is also one of the reasons for the growth. So there are total 3 reasons why growth is taking place in the living organisms. Okay, note down this point students. Students, if we think about growth in living organisms, then we can also argue that some non-living things are also able to grow. Okay, for example, look here. Imagine a mountain. Imagine there is a mountain. Okay, this is a mountain. Right? So, because of deposition of new particles, new material on the surface of this existing mountain, what happens? The size of the mountain is increasing and the height of the mountain is also increasing day by day. Okay, after some 50 years, say 50 years, there is a considerable increase in the size of the mountain and the height of the mountain. Can we call this mountain as a living organism? Why not? We can call this mountain also a living organism because growth is taking place, size of the mountain is increasing. Yes or no? Another example I can quote here is sand mound. Sand mound. If you go to desert, you can see there will be sand mounds like this. Sand mounds. Heaps of sand. Okay. So after say some 2 years or 3 years, because of deposition of sand particles during sandstorm, the size of the sand mound may increase like this. Okay, because of deposition of sand particles, the size of the sand mound is increasing. Can we call this sand mound a living organism? Okay, so here what is the difference in growth of living things and non-living things? In non-living things like mountain and sand mound, the growth is taking place, but the growth is external. The growth is external. The growth is taking place on the outside, not inside. But in living organisms, the growth is internal. The growth is taking place internally within the body, isn't it? So that is the main difference between the non-living and living things in terms of growth. So since growth is seen both in the living things and also non-living things like mountains and sand mounds, so we cannot consider growth as a defining character of living organisms. Okay, so growth is not considered as a defining character of living organisms. Is not a defining character. It is not a defining character of living organisms. Why it is not a defining character? Because growth is seen in the non-living things also. That's why we cannot use this term as a character of all living organisms. Understood, my students? Understood? If you have understood, we will go to the next character of living organisms. Note down this. Now we will discuss the second character of living organisms, that is reproduction. Reproduction, very, very important character of living organism, students. Reproduction. What is reproduction? It is a biological process. It is a biological process by which the living organisms produce their progeny which look alike and resemble their parents. So I am going to write the definition. Copy down, students. It is a biological process by which living organisms produce what? Produce progeny. Progeny means what? Children. In biology, the children is called as progeny. Produce progeny which look alike and resemble parent. Okay, so the progeny which is produced by the parent will look alike, will be similar in terms of their appearance, and also they will be similar to that of parents. So this process we are calling it as reproduction. So if this reproduction process is not there in living organisms, what will happen, children? What will happen? Come on, my friends, tell me. The species will completely disappear. The species will become extinct. The organisms, they will simply disappear from the earth. Okay, so suppose if human beings does not reproduce, then what happen? After some years there will be no human beings on the earth, isn't it? There will be only other animals and plants. So every organism will try to increase its number, its race, by this process called as reproduction. But the reproductive rate will differ from organism to organism. Some organisms, they reproduce in large number, isn't it? Like fishes. But some organisms, they reproduce only in limited number. Understood? Yes. Now, is this reproduction process seen in all the living organisms? No. Reproduction may not be available in some living organisms. Examples: reproduction not observed in. It is not observed in some living organisms. What are those? Sterile worker bees in a bees colony, and mule. So these animals, even though they are living organisms, they are not naturally able to reproduce. Okay, so because of this, we cannot use this reproduction as a defining character of living organisms, since some of the organisms are not reproducing. In a bees colony, if you observe, there will be worker bees which will be carrying honey from the flowers to the honeycomb. Okay, so these bees, worker bees, they doesn't have reproductive system, and that's why they cannot reproduce. Okay, similarly, mule, what is a mule? Mule is a hybrid animal which is produced by crossing donkey and horse. Understood? So when donkey and horse are crossed, it will produce a new hybrid animal which is called as mule. This mule, even though it is a normal animal, but it cannot reproduce. That's why we cannot consider reproduction as defining character of living organisms. So what we conclude? Reproduction is not defining. It is not defining character of living organisms. It is not a defining character of living organisms. Okay. So now we will discuss some methods of reproduction which is seen in living organisms, which is mentioned in the NCERT book. There are different methods of reproductions. Sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction. Some of the organisms use sexual reproduction, and another method of reproduction is asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction. Okay, so basically there are two methods of reproductions: sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. What is sexual reproduction? It is a method of reproduction which involves fusion of gametes, male gamete fusing with the female gamete. So a male gamete and female gamete, both of them fuse with each other. When this process is involved, fusion is involved, fusion of gametes is involved, then we call that method as sexual reproduction. Example, human beings. Example, human beings, they follow this method called as sexual reproduction. Then what is asexual reproduction? In this method of reproduction, there is no involvement of gametes. The male gamete and female gametes are not at all involved in this asexual reproduction. Gametes not involved in asexual reproduction. So some of the methods of asexual reproduction are given in NCERT book. So we will discuss some examples of asexual reproduction. First, spore formation. Spore formation. So what is spore formation? In fungi, the fungi produce large number of spores inside some closed structures. These spores are extremely small, microscopic. When these spores are released to outside, they will be carried by wind, by air currents to far away places. When these spores fall on suitable food material or suitable substratum, then the spores will germinate and again form new fungi. So this method of reproduction is called as spore formation. It is a asexual reproduction. Okay. Next, fragmentation. Another method of asexual reproduction is fragmentation. So what is fragmentation? Students, look here. Algae. The algae which are filamentous, which are like long thread-like structures. Okay, these filamentous algae, they will break into small fragments like this. Okay, each fragment is again able to develop into new alga. It is able to develop into new alga. This method we are calling it as fragmentation. This similar method of reproduction is also seen in fungi. In fungi, the fungi is also having the body which is similar to that of algae, that is the body is having slender branched thread-like structures which is called as mycelium. Here also the fungal filaments are also going to break into small fragments. Each fragment it is going to develop into new fungus. So this is also kind of fragmentation. A similar method of fragmentation is also seen in moss plants. It is also seen in moss plants and it is observed in protonema stage. What is the stage? Protonema stage. It is one of the stage in the life cycle of moss plants. So the protonema stage also have filamentous structure. So there the moss plant is also showing this method of asexual reproduction. Next, very important method of asexual reproduction, that is true regeneration. True regeneration. This method of asexual reproduction is seen in an organism called planaria. In an organism called as planaria. Look here students, the planaria organism is like this. This organism, it belongs to Platyhelminthes. Okay, so in this organism what happens? Accidentally, if the body of this organism breaks into two pieces, then the organism is not going to die. Then what will happen? The organism will recreate the part which has been lost. So this portion of the organism, again it will regenerate the remaining part of its body. So by this process the organisms are able to reproduce by process called as true regeneration. Understood students? Note down this, very important. Students, now look here, one more method of asexual reproduction we are going to discuss, that is budding. Budding in Hydra. Budding in Hydra. You might have studied in your classes. What is Hydra? Hydra is a multicellular organism. It is having tentacles like this. It is having tentacles. Okay. So by using tentacles, the hydra can collect food material and also it can move in the water. It is an aquatic organism, an aquatic animal. Okay. So this hydra during asexual reproduction, it will form a small bud. It will form a small bud. A small bud will develop on lateral surface of the body. Okay. This bud, eventually it will grow in size. Eventually the bud will grow in size. Okay, and finally this bud will develop tentacles. It will develop tentacles like its parent, and finally it is going to detach. It is going to separate and it is going to develop into new hydra. New hydra. So this method of reproduction, we are calling it as budding. Okay, budding in hydra. Very, very important point for your NEET exam students. Note down this. The similar method of budding is also seen in another fungus, that is budding. Budding in yeast. Budding in yeast. Budding process in yeast. So in yeast, this is a yeast cell. It is a microscopic organism, microorganism. We have to observe this under only microscope. Okay, this is a yeast cell. A single yeast cell, it will produce a small bud on its surface. Eventually this bud will detach from this parent cell and it will develop into a new yeast cell. So this is also called as budding, which is observed in a organism called yeast. It is a kind of fungus. Okay, you know the yeast which is used for making bread. Okay, the yeast which is used for making pizza, the same kind of yeast. Okay, so note down this point students, very, very important. Note down all these points in your notebook.